Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Jamie B. I read a ton of books, and lately, my autistic brain has been on a special interest. I've been reading a lot of East Asian works in translation, mostly novels, but not entirely. Um, I have a lot of arcs that fall into this category, so there will be some arcs that I'll be starting that fit into this trend. I don't know how long my brain is going to be fixated on this topic, but as long as it is interested, we'll keep going. So let me show you what I've been reading and tell you about some of the good ones. So, the first two books that I finished that got me into this topic are uh, two novels. One's magical realism and one's a murder mystery. Um, both by Japanese artists, I think. Yeah, both Japanese. The Lantern of Lost Memories is a magical realism dealing with the immediate afterlife. So it's like Vigil by George Saunders, where you have somebody that's meeting people as they die and like helping them to whatever happens afterwards. Kind of like the way Death in the Discworld series meets people when they die and helps them to the afterlife. Very much that kind of character. But in this case, there's a lot of plot surrounding the individual that's meeting these people, as also is true in Vigil, for that matter. So similar sorts of stories. If you want a theme on that kind of topic, both are excellent. Um, a Quiet Place by Seicho Matsumoto is a murder mystery. I think I've read other murder mysteries with at least one common character, but I'm not sure. I read them so infrequently that I always forget who I already have met in these books. So it's possible it's a standalone and might just have similar names to other books he's written. But I don't think this is the only Matsumoto I've read. In any case, Japanese murder mysteries I've found tend to be very stylized in a way that they're more literary than a lot of what I'm used to in murder mysteries in general. And the things that make them thrillery tend to be more culturally situated. Um, so I think in getting into A Quiet Place to where I was appreciating it more, I still only gave it 4 stars. It didn't really draw me in that great. But in the process of getting into that mood, I kind of got stuck in that mood. So I finished a few other arcs and then moved on to The Gate. So The Gate is from 1910 originally. And it's interesting because this is pre-World War One. So Japan had an emperor, and that sort of feudal or modern feudalistic society with an emperor and all the political structure that went with that until they lost World War Two. So we are several decades before that. Very different place from Japan post World War Two. Um, so that was fun. Just I haven't read as many books set in Japan before the existence of an emperor was even a question. Um, so that was fun. Um, we have a clerk, Sosuke, and his wife Oyone. They are trying to live a quiet life. And Oyone can't have children, and it's kind of a recurring question whether that's a problem or not. They actually are pretty comfortable just as a couple, but there's, of course, societal pressures about that she's supposed to want children. But they're getting older, and maybe it's not a big deal. They've lived their lives without children. Um, was there a lot of plot? I'm not sure. I did not really find it very plot heavy, um, but it was cultural interest for me, not being Japanese and having not read a lot of books set in this era in Japan. So it got 4.25 stars just because of that. Um, but I don't actually remember much about it, even reading the summary. Yeah, I remember vibes. I remember it was really interesting seeing Japan before all the stuff happened. But that's about it. Um, so then we moved on to The Crazed by Ha Jin. So this is not the first time I've read this author. Um, I might have read more by them, but I don't know for sure. This one is getting into what does it mean to be insane, um, but then also kind of morphs from kind of the title theme of insanity to the Tiananmen Square massacre and individuals that find themselves in that square on the week of and the day of the massacre. Um, and then how that information morphs. So we see what happens in Tiananmen Square, and then what's said about that event afterwards, and how the understanding of Tiananmen Square changes um, as you get further away from that massacre in time and space. So I found it really interesting. Um, yeah, and I did not expect it to go in that direction. I did not read the summary before I read it, so I'm sure it said on the back that it was about that. But anyway, it was really good. Also, this one, um, we're seeing the world through the perspective of a young man who is engaged to the daughter of his beloved professor. The beloved professor has had a stroke, and he is helping take care of his professor, and is hearing all sorts of things that his professor is saying that change his understanding of who this professor is, and also start to shift the student's relationship with the professor's daughter. So there's a lot going on in this book. Then we have the first of the non-fictions that I read in this project, Rental Person Who Does Nothing by Shoji Morimoto. Um, this is a memoir by Shoji Morimoto about his experiences renting himself out as a guy who does nothing. So he rents himself out for people that just want someone to sit in the same room with them or go to the theater with them or other things where they just want somebody there and that somebody can just be there. And sometimes he can sit there and read a book or do whatever on his phone while just being there for the allotted time, and he's just as the tin says, a rental person who does nothing, which is a fascinating concept. Um, and I gave that one 5 stars. It was well done. It was a short memoir that, yeah, was a fascinating idea. Um, Then we have Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami. Um, I've read something by Kawakami. I don't remember if I've read anything longer or if just short stories. I know I have an arc, though, by Hiromi Kawakami, so I will be reading more. Under the Eye of the Big Bird is science fiction and fascinating. Um, we've gone far enough in the future that humans have evolved a lot, and AI is involved, and maybe selective breeding, and who knows what else. And it's a weird future world. I loved it. I did not love the bit later in the book where this AI character basically tells you exactly how the world got to where it is. Um, Basically, a giant data dump in place of actually building up this world. In one book, it would be hard to give that much information, but I'd rather have just not had as much information and not had that data dump. Or have a series and really develop the world. Um, but this would have been a 5-star book for me, except for that data dump section that it just threw off the momentum of the entire book. And yeah, it was an interesting world building, but it wasn't executed very well. But up until that point, it was a 5-star book, and it got better. It just not enough. So it lost half a star. But it only lost half a star because the rest of the book was just not good. Um, so yeah, fascinating world, definitely worth reading more. Um, and then my first arc for this project, Sympathy Tower Tokyo by Qudan. Um, this one is about an architect who designs a a tower for convicts. It's a prison tower, and it becomes controversial because she makes it like a perfect like utopian sort of experience for these criminals that are incarcerated, and then everybody else gets mad because criminals shouldn't have such a nice life, basically. Um, and they do set up a system where non-criminals can live there if they want, as long as they can justify that they might have become criminals, that they had a hard life, and therefore they should have a chance to live somewhere nice. But it still doesn't really deal with all the critique of criminals getting such a nice living space. Um, so it's kind of an interesting concept. Um, some of it was a bit overdone. We're talking about the building of a tower. That's all it is. I seriously doubt that in real life this issue would have stayed in mainstream interest for more than about a day, maybe a week. So some of it, like the architect getting death threats enough to have to go into hiding, not likely. Um, so, so it was a little overdone, but it was still an interesting book. And it brought up a lot of questions about what does it mean to incarcerate people? Why are we doing this? Um, you know, how could we do it better? Um, Next up, I read The Practice of Not Thinking, A Guide to Mindful Living by Ryūnosuke Koike. I think that's how it's said, but not swearing by my pronunciation of some of these names. I am not fluent by any stretch. Um, the Practice of Not Thinking is a Zen, kind of modernist Zen, um, kind of self-help book about how to make living less stressful by being more mindful. It makes a lot of assumptions that I found less helpful. It's very much geared to your typical middle class, um, like normal job holding person. And if you don't have that lifestyle, a lot of the assumptions make this book less helpful. It's still not a bad book, but I didn't get a lot out of it. Um, but I know it wasn't bad. It certainly is something I could see being useful for people I know. Just I was glad it was short. It is 128 pages according to Storygraph, so it's not bad. Dinner at the Night Library was really good. Uh, 4.5 stars. So really good, not 5-star good. Um, Night Library is a non-lending library that takes in collections of books owned by famous people. And then you can go and browse through those famous people's books. You can't take them out, but you can read them while you're there. A lot of people apparently go and do research, or they just want to see if the famous person owned a particular book or whatever. Um, Kind of underwhelming as a library, but okay. And a lot of the plot is around how this library happened in the first place and who the people are that are at the center of this project. And we're seeing it from the perspective of a young woman who's been hired to work there. And then we also get the stories of other people that work there. So it ends up being kind of an episodic, cozy, speculative fiction, maybe. Um, More literary than speculative, but yeah, it was pretty good. I enjoyed it, but not a 5-star. It was just. So next up, we have a pair of books. We have Lost Souls Meet Under a Full Moon. I will absolutely not spoil this book because I know someone from the readathon I'm in is going to be reading this one soon. This is another one of those books where it's kind of magical realism and the afterlife. But in this one, we have a family that has the power to negotiate a meeting between someone alive and somebody dead. And there's rules to it. And so different people show up wanting to speak to some dead loved one. So in that sense, it's one of these episodic, kind of cozy magical realism books, which is such a trend right now. This is book one, and in this one, we're kind of introduced to what this family does, and we go through some of their negotiations and how they work out, and then we get book two. And they do need to be read in order. How to Hold Someone in Your Heart, which continues the family's story. So the family that has this power. If you read them out of order, you get spoilers. Definitely try to read these ones in the correct order. But they're good. 4.75 stars, I think, for both. Pretty sure I gave it 4.75. Came in. There we go. Yeah, 4.75 stars for both. Both of them were, really good, but not amazing. I need to reread them kind of good. And it may just be me at that point. It's such a trend, these cozy magical realism books, that I don't know, maybe I just read too many this year. But thankfully, this project has not been entirely that kind of book. I was concerned when I started thinking about what most of the books I've read by East Asian authors are, that it was going to be all literary murder mysteries and um, cozy magical realism episodic books. Uh, some of both, but not overwhelmingly either one. Next up, we have two books that were less successful, but Blowfish wasn't bad. It just has a lot of trigger warnings on it. If suicide is something that you find triggering, don't read this book. Um, it is about suicide, very pointedly. And there are a lot of scenes and discussions of suicide that you probably don't want to read unless you have a therapist to read it with. It is that degree of triggering. Um, if that's not an issue for you, it's an interesting literary fiction about suicide. Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami started out okay. I guess this is one of Murakami's earlier books. Um, Maybe his first book published in English. Um, it reminded me very much of Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So that, yeah, young man trying to find his way in the world. Um, yeah, very much learning about his body and his interests and that kind of thing. Um, and I've read plenty of those. They're not really my thing. I'm not a young man trying to find myself, and so I can only relate so much. Um, but then it goes off into left field with a story related by another character of her sexual experience with a young girl who sexually assaults her. And I'm not sure why we needed that in this book. It's not a story that was necessary for the plot of this novel. It just is here, randomly have this sexual story that is totally inappropriate and really uncomfortable. Um, yeah. It made some of the scenes in Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn seem really mild by comparison. Yeah. Anyway, if that's going to be triggering for you, you don't need to read Norwegian Wood. I know it's on book lists, and if you are a completionist and have to read it for a book list, I'm sorry. Although, if you skip the section where that story happens, you won't miss the plot. It's not necessary. I'm not sure why they put it in. And then the last two I've read for this project are The Nine Cloud Dream by Kim Man-Jung. This one is fun. It is a classic from the 1600s, published in 1689. It's a Korean classic. And it has some interesting gender stuff I was not expecting. So Nine Cloud Dream is a classic, Korean classic from the 1600s. And it is kind of a coming of age and the story of this guy's life, a Bildungsroman, story of this one person's life from kind of graduation through old age. So he's passed the civil service exam kind of thing in China and is now able to become an official. And he's going through various adventures while, finding his place in the world and meeting princesses and falling in love with multiple princesses and stuff like that. So, not too surprising for the era that this book is written in, I suppose. So what really surprised me in this one is that the women in this book are actually developed characters. They have agency, they have personalities. They don't all have the same character arc. Um, yes, the main male character does end up with two wives and six concubines, so kind of expected there. But it reads more like polyamory, not a harem. And you really do get the sense that the women are as intimate with each other as they are with their man. Um, and then at the end, they all end up being bodhisattvas. So they all nine of them, uh, reach enlightenment and become bodhisattvas and don't have to reincarnate unless they want to, and they're just helping other people find enlightenment. And like that's what a bodhisattva is anyway. Um, but it's interesting because um, in stories I've read that are similar in setting in the past, usually it's just the guy that finds enlightenment, becomes a bodhisattva, and then maybe the women end up, setting up a nunnery in his name or something like that. Um, but no, in this one, all eight women also get to be enlightened and move on from this, you know, mortal world into whatever comes next. So it was just a really interesting book, and I will have to reread this one at some point um, when I'm thinking more in terms of historical gender roles in Asia, because this one was more interesting than I expected. All right, and last but not least, the one I just finished today, The Hole by Hye-young Pyun. This is a Korean thriller, psychological thriller, with really good disability rep. In this story, we have a 47-year-old man who has woken up in a hospital following a horrific car crash, and he is paralyzed, with maybe some chance of getting some function back, but it's going to be a long road. Um, and right from the early part of this book, we get some really good disability rep scenes. There's one that started me off liking this aspect of this book, where he's being loaded into elevators for tests and things in this hospital. And he's talking about the differences when it's, members of the general public, just adults in general that are, trying not to look at him or trying not to make eye contact or whatever, versus when they have children with them, and then the children are staring at him and poking at their adults to stare at him, and then the adults don't know what to do with this interaction and make it more awkward. And um, I I'm not that kind of disabled, but I totally recognized his reaction because with my disability, with my hands being the way they are, I get this a lot to the point where in certain settings I really hate having to deal with other people's children because it's not the children themselves, they don't know better, and I've developed ways of talking to children, answering their decidedly rude but well-meant questions about my hands, and then they move on and all is good. If they're with their adults though, oh boy, can that get awkward. So yeah, so that was a lovely bit in this book that doesn't always get a lot talked about it because it's so awkward to begin with. And then how do you talk about that where it doesn't make people feel more awkward, especially if they have children that might be doing this to people, me or other people. It's just an awkward topic. So it's nice to see it in a novel. And then we get into more, how being absolutely dependent on caregivers makes the person being taken care of feel. What it's like to be so absolutely dependent. And all the intentional and unintentional ways that the caregivers can abuse that power dynamic between them and the person that's being taken care of. And just like, what is the role in society of someone that's so dependent? And how are they supposed to feel when they can't do anything for themselves, let alone for anyone else? So what is their value once they become this helpless? So it was a really interesting book from all these perspectives, but it is a psychological thriller. And it takes a nicely dark turn. And I love how it ends. Yeah. It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. Yeah. So definitely a 5-star thriller. Highly recommend. I had fun with this one. All right. So in addition to the ones that I've already talked about that I've already read, I have a lot of arcs lined up. I have 20. Because 20 fit on a page, I think. Let's see if I have more than 20. 28. I have 28 arcs currently by Asian authors, mostly in translation. Some of these they translated their own or they wrote in English. So it's not as perfect a set as what I've read so far. But I have A Beast Slinks Towards Beijing, which I was supposed to read a couple months ago for a prize list. Far From Everywhere by Hiromi Kawakami, which is a murder mystery, I believe. Timber and Lua, which is literary fiction, I believe. Perfect Happiness by Hye-young. Call Me Ishmael by Xiaolu Guo. Ghost Cities by Xiang Lu. The Crossing of the Boars by Zhang Xuexing. Crossing of the Boars by Zhang Guixing. The Three Daughters of Annam by Feng Nguyen. When Mikan Road Was Ours by D.K. Furutani. The Lady Killer by Masako Togawa. The Murdered Husband Returns by Mina Sakurai. The What's a Snow Leopard to You by Chenfu Su. A Perfect Day to Put Your Head in the Oven by Li Chia-ying. Exit 8 by Genki Kawamura. Horizon Hong Kong by Zusi. The Privileged by Wu Xiaolei. Crown City by Naomi Hirahara. Traveling Practice by Yusuke Norishiru. A Mouthful of Fins by Chio Yeon. 3 by Na Zhang, which I think is 3 novellas, but I'm not sure. That might be like 3 shorter works. Club Nine Tails by Jinwoo Chong. The Clock House Murders by Yukito Ayatsuji. Hunger by Choi Jin Young. Troubled Waters by Ichio Higuchi. Before I Knew I Loved You by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which is in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. One is the one that came out this year, a couple months ago at this point. The Seekers of Deer Creek by Thao Tai. The Dilemmas of Working Women by Fumio Yamamoto. And All the World Can Hold by Jung Yun. How many of those did I get pronounced correctly? Good question. But so in addition to all the ones that I've got on my computer in various forms, I also have these books in print that might be part of this project. So if I get to them, you'll hear something about these books too. I'll force you to sit through my attempts at butchering their names. We'll get to that. But yeah, so it's been an interesting project so far, and hopefully I finish a few more before my brain decides to move on to a new topic. So, have you read anything by the authors that I've been reading? And what have you read, and what would you recommend? Hopefully I will stick to this topic for a little bit longer, because I obviously have a few books in this category to read, including ARCs and print books that I should be reading. But one of the things with having an autistic brain, especially if you really go into the special interests, is that your brain moves on, and sometimes it's easier to just go with it. So if that happens, I guess I'll find out what I'm interested in next. In the meantime, I will continue with more videos about this topic as I read more, and let you know when a new topic comes up. There will also be videos about all the other stuff I've been reading, because I have been reading things besides just East Asian authors in translation. But this has been the bulk of my reading over the past week for sure. So I will see you in the next video. And yes, I will be trying to make a video for my original Jamie B. Books channel soon as well. Maybe tonight. We'll just see if the internet cooperates long enough. 'Cause yeah, I've had to restart this video so many times. So, happy reading, everyone. And I will see you in the next video. And possibly in the next video on the Jamie B. Books channel as well. Yay. Bye, guys!